Hello, welcome to Recovery Demystified, a show where we explore our relationship to substances from a radical, non-religious, and empowering lens. Our sobriety is not a purity contract. It is an invitation to become curious about ourselves and find our own unique paths to growth and healing. If you've been questioning the role of alcohol or drugs in your life and haven't found the resources that you need, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hello. Welcome back to Recovery Demystified. My name's Early. I'm so happy to have y'all here today. Today, I'm going to talk about a few more books and podcasts that I think are really great that could be helpful to a person's recovery. And I haven't done one of these episodes in a minute, but in my own recovery, reading books and listening to podcasts was instrumental to being able to learn about how the brain works and the science behind addiction. And then as I started peeling back the layers of the onion in my recovery and learning, for instance, that I was autistic and then also embodying fully my transness, I started to read a bunch of different kinds of books, more than just recovery books. So obviously recovery is about changing our relationship to substances, but it's also about discovering why we had this troubling relationship to substances in the first place. And a lot of times it's like trauma or living without authenticity or just like a million different things, like all of the things that can be out of balance in our lives. So oftentimes I recommend books and podcasts that are not directly related to addiction recovery, but in my perspective, everything is related to addiction recovery because our general sense of like health and wellness and authenticity and engagement in the world in a way that like helps us to feel full and alive and creating that life we no longer need to escape from. Like all of that stuff is super interconnected. And one of the key themes of this podcast is neurodivergence and how that shows up in our addiction and our recovery. So several of the books and podcasts this time are going to be having to do with neurodivergence. But yeah, before I dive into the book and podcast list, I just want to say that if you get anything out of this podcast, if it's helping you at all, there's a few different things that you can do to help me out in the spirit of reciprocity. We're chipping away at the goal to have the Patreon eventually help this podcast to be self-supporting. So thank you to everyone who's currently a Patreon member, and a special thank you to Craig, who was the first ever Patreon member. Y'all, I thought I made it wrong because no one was signing up for it. And then Craig signed up for it and I was like, oh shit, it's real. But yeah, we're chipping away at that. So if you're able to sign up for the Patreon, the lowest tier there is just $3 a month. And if you cannot afford to sign up for the Patreon, there's several other different ways that are completely free and super easy that you can help support the podcast. And one is to share it with a friend. Like there's so many people that are struggling with addiction that could really use a resource like this. So sharing it with a friend is super helpful. And hitting that subscribe button and then rating and reviewing is also extremely helpful. It helps like the algorithm push this out to more people who might need to hear this message. And I actually got a really sweet review that I want to read for y'all. It says, "This podcast gently offers perspective and validation for folks seeking a recovery community that is focused on acceptance, evidence-based practices, and compassion. Unlike most mainstream 12-step abstinence-based resources, Early provides a safe space for anyone seeking something different, especially those of us who are LGBTQIA+ and or people who use drugs and or people who are neurodivergent." So thank you for that review. And if you leave a sweet and generous review like that, I just might read it on the show. But anyway, what I'm here to talk about today is books and podcasts. When I was in the deepest, darkest part of my addiction and I tried 12 steps and going to AA and I fucking hated it, I first was introduced to Recovery Elevator, the podcast, and This Naked Mind by Annie Grace. And that book and that podcast set me off on this like amazing trajectory of just diving in and like reading every book on addiction that I could get my hands on, listening to every podcast that I could get my hands on, and just like educating myself and learning and trying new things on and growing and changing. And ultimately, it was books and podcasts that provided the like education and confidence for me to be able to get into long-term recovery. So I used to do the book and podcast list a lot more often on this podcast, but I'm sorry, I've been slacking on it, but I promise you I'm out here filtering through all the bullshit, and I like low-key kind of want to do an episode where I talk about really terrible books and really terrible podcasts, because there's some out there that are just like, I don't know, like especially in self-help books, there's several of them that get recommended really, really often, and I find them to be distasteful, to say the least. But that's a tangent. If y'all want an episode about the worst self-help books and podcasts, hit me up in the email or down in the comments. And anyway, the books that I'm here to talk about to you today are, the first one is In Praise of Addiction by Elizabeth Roberts. And this one I discovered through an email. So y'all, I get a ton of like really whack emails from people that are just trying to like promote themselves and sell their books, and that have nothing to do with like the theme and the ethos of this podcast. But when I got this email about In Praise of Addiction, I was like, it actually really piqued my interest, because I'm a big fan of alternative perspectives and like deconstructing society's normative myths about what addiction is and what it means, and different ways that we can like destigmatize addiction and learn to love ourselves. So of course I was intrigued when I heard the title In Praise of Addiction, and she was also the first author that actually sent me a copy of the book. Like I've had a couple of other authors want to come on the show, and I was like mildly interested, so I was like, okay, well, send me your book and then we'll see if it's like any good. And they would never even send me their book, so I'm like, okay, no. But Elizabeth sent me her book, and then how I like to read books lately is I'll read a chapter every morning while I'm eating breakfast. And I started to look forward to eating breakfast because the book was really fucking good. Also, sneak peek. Also, I ended up doing a interview with Elizabeth Roberts, and that is coming out next week, Tuesday. So stay tuned for that one. So basically, she's an anthropologist, and she's in Mexico studying the effects of like environmental hazards, like lead, on people's health. And then while she was there, she started to notice like culturally how differently people related to addiction. And the basic like overarching theme is that addiction in the places that she was staying in Mexico was revered as something that brings us together. And that was in contrast to vice. And those folks considered vice to be something that makes a person go off and be alone. And so, yeah, so there's addiction and then there's vice. And just, yeah, the cultural difference and how these folks are like celebrating their togetherness, even if it is over something that is like unhealthy or harmful. And the book was so interesting because it just kept going like into these dusty corners that you never really see books go into. So she's talking about like NAFTA and the drug war and its effects on Mexico. She's talking about inhalant use. Like, y'all know that I had a problem with inhalants, and it really grinds my gears that I never hear anyone talking about it, because I don't know, it's like one of the more stigmatized addictions, or like people think you shouldn't get addicted to inhalants because it's like little kid shit, but actually it's fucking addictive just like everything else. But so I'm super grateful that she touches on that in her book. And then also she really gets into like some anti-capitalist shit, which I can very much appreciate. She talks about how in the United States we have this like reverence for independence and this like fear or hatred of dependence, and that being like one of the ways that capitalism keeps us separate from each other and prevents us from forming true community. She also talks about how the soda companies are subsidized by the government, and then they get like free water, and then there's not clean drinking water for people, but the soda companies make shit tons of soda and it's everywhere and it's really cheap, and then people end up drinking a bunch of it and getting diabetes. And then there's like public health campaigns that are like, oh, but, drink soda responsibly or whatever. And it's like, okay, but actually it's the structure of the government and capitalism that has made clean drinking water scarce and has made subsidized soda extremely cheap and really plentiful, and just like shoves all this shit in people's face and then demonizes these same people for drinking the soda that's subsidized and placed in front of their face. So there's just like a bunch of different, just like dusty corners and avenues that she goes down in this book. She talks about her own problems with binge eating. She talks about having a difficult relationship with her sister, who is addicted to alcohol and then also uses benzos. And I was pretty impressed with this book. Like, I don't really interview authors because I want this podcast to be normal people. I don't want it to be like every other podcast that's like, oh, here's Mr. PhD doctor man with his 8 books. Like, that's not the vibe here. But I was just pretty shocked at actually how good this book was, how humanizing it is, and how destigmatizing it is. So that's why I recommend In Praise of Addiction by Elizabeth Roberts. Then the next book that I recommend is Unmasking Autism: Discovering the New Faces of Neurodiversity by Dr. Devin Price. And I've reviewed his book, Laziness Does Not Exist, previously on this podcast. So Devin Price is trans and autistic. So I'm also trans and autistic. So I'm just like, wow, that's so fucking relatable. So he also wrote this book, Unmasking Autism. And I only realized that I was autistic in my 30s when I got into long-term addiction recovery. Before that, I just was suppressing all of the discomfort that I experienced socially with primarily alcohol. And then when I was finally sober and I had all this anxiety around other people, I was like, what is going on here? Like, why are the lights so bright? Why is the sound so loud? Why can't I stand being around groups of people? And then I started learning about neurodivergence and autism, and eventually I did get officially diagnosed so I could get workplace accommodations when I worked on the ambulance. But it's just so cool to discover a book that's also by a trans autistic person. And a lot of the stress that leads neurodivergent people to have addictions has to do with masking. And masking is basically when we pretend to be someone that we're not in order to avoid causing other people to be uncomfortable. But the thing about masking is that neurotypical people can tell when we're doing it anyway. So we're actually just putting a bunch more stress on ourselves to try to like front like we're normal, or force ourselves into difficult situations that make us uncomfortable, or say yes when we mean no. There's just so many ways that masking can manifest. And when I read this book early on in addiction recovery, it was just such a breath of fresh air and a massive relief to have this permission slip to try to explore what it might mean to unmask. And when I started unmasking, it was definitely really uncomfortable, and my relationships with a lot of people changed. But the ones that, like the friends that stuck around, those relationships really deepened because they accepted me as I am doing this process of unmasking. And like, for instance, one of the things is like, I just like being invited to stuff. I don't always want to go, but I really like being invited. And some of my friends are like, thought it was weird or like shitty that I never wanted to show up to stuff, but actually it was me living my truth and just creating a life that was more comfortable for me, and where I didn't have so much stress where I needed to feel like I had to drink to cope with it. And then on the flip side of that, there's the friends who invite me to stuff even though they know I'm not going to go. And I just feel like that's such a generous, caring act of unconditional love. And the interesting thing about my particular flavor of autism is that sometimes just being invited is all the social connection that I need. Like knowing that I'm wanted, but not having to put myself through something that might be stressful or uncomfortable. So shout out and thank you to the friends that invite me to stuff and aren't mad at me when I don't go. But yeah, if you're neurodivergent or if you think you might be on the autism spectrum, the book Unmasking Autism by Dr. Devin Price it's pretty instrumental. Yeah, Permission to Unmask. Then the last book I wanted to talk about today is Many Roads, One Journey, Moving Beyond the 12 Steps by Charlotte Davis Castle, who I guess is also a PhD. And this book I found because Holly Whitaker recommended it on a podcast that I was listening to, and it's actually from 1992. And it, amazingly enough, in 1992 is a book that's addressing intersectional feminism and how like patriarchy and racism and ableism and sexism all overlap with addiction recovery, and how the 12 steps is forced upon us as like an arm of the patriarchy. And I just like was so fucking excited to be like, holy shit, there's a 30-something-year-old book that's talking about intersectional feminism and addiction recovery. And then I also get really frustrated because this information is so suppressed. Even in today's society, the only fucking thing you see when you try to go seek addiction recovery is AA, NA, and 12-step programs. And there's been so many other attempts at people that are trying to create something different, including Charlotte Castle here in 1992. And I feel like sometimes like I'm spelunking in a dark cave trying to find this fucking information, and it's amazing to finally find it. And I'm really grateful to be able to just share it with you so you don't have to go spelunking in a dark cave to find this fucking information. But it's not a perfect book, and you can definitely tell it's like 35 years old. And sometimes I'm like, oh my God, she's making this more complicated than it needs to be. But if you're someone that tried 12 steps and you're like super turned off by it, but you can't figure out why, this book is really amazing and like validating. Yeah, because she just kind of chips away at why it gives us that ick. And yeah, so that's why I would recommend Many Roads, One Journey by Dr. Charlotte Castle. And then I want to talk about a few podcasts that I've really been enjoying. I got super burned out for a while on trying to find new recovery podcasts. And honestly, none of these three are about recovery. They're all just about like neurodivergence and personal growth, which, like I said before, fucking everything in our lives is connected to our recovery because we're trying to create that life we don't need to escape from. So a lot of it is going to be unmasking, like I talked about earlier, and just self-discovery and peeling back the layers of that onion and figuring out who we are down at the core, and then building it all back up and making something beautiful. The first podcast that I want to talk about is called Adulting with Autism by April Ratchford. And first off, it was really cool in the thumbnail to see that it was a Black host, because I feel like podcast land is, like a lot of stuff in Western culture it's white centered for the most part. So it was just really cool to see a Black woman on the thumbnail. And as someone with autism, I'm really excited to see people like unabashedly, especially professional people, just talking about their own personal experiences with autism, and then interviewing other people that have sort of more radical perspectives on it. And her episodes, she's got things such as late identified autism, rejection sensitivity, and burnout in helping professions. Okay, relatable. Mismatched desire, sensory needs, and good sex for neurodivergent brains. What the fuck do you mean rejection is redirection? Money, debt, and neurodivergent brains. So yeah, she's just got like a bunch of different topics. The episodes are really bite-sized. They're like 20 to 30 minutes. And they're just on like a million different things and connecting our autism to all different parts of our lives and finding ways to live as an adult with autism and just like, yeah, just sort of have it be a bit less frustrating and a bit more humanizing. And I really love her show. So that's why I would recommend Adulting with Autism, the podcast. The next one that I recommend is On Attachment by Stephanie Rigg. So if y'all have been listening to me for a while, you know that I'm obsessed with attachment theory and that I have primarily anxious attachment, although I have some avoidant tendencies at times. So I'm just constantly learning about attachment issues and attachment theory. And I guess if you've never heard of attachment theory, basically it's the concept that when we're tiny little kids and our brains are developing and we're learning how people relate to each other, there's certain ways that our caregivers can treat us that will either lead us to having secure attachment, and that's when our parents are like well attuned and validating of our emotions, or we can end up with anxious attachment, which is when our caregivers have inconsistent emotional responses towards us, so we get anxious because we don't exactly know what to expect. And then avoidant attachment comes from profound emotional neglect, and that's when the child's brain just learns that I can only take care of myself and I can't depend on anyone else. So that's when connection feels dangerous. So there's a lot more to it, but that's the basics of it. And in my recovery, I started learning about my own attachment style and the attachment style of others. And it was like the fucking veil got lifted from over my eyes. And I started to just totally understand how I've been relating to people and how I'm like magnetically attracted to people that are not right for me. And anyway, Stephanie Riggs' podcast on attachment, it's primarily geared towards people with anxious attachment, but she does touch on everything. The episodes are really bite-sized and yeah, just like really relatable. She does spend a lot of time trying to sell you stuff, which is kind of annoying, but you know, everybody's just trying to get by, so bless her. But yeah, if you're someone who has like a pattern of difficult relationships in your life and you're trying to figure out what the fuck is up with that, it might have something to do with your attachment style. And that's why I recommend On Attachment by Stephanie Rigg. Then the last podcast that I've really been into that I highly recommend is ADHD Aha by Laura Key. And that one is people's stories realizing that they have ADHD in adulthood, and that's where the aha comes from. And she interviews people about that process of figuring out that you have ADHD and like what the signs were and like how people cope with it now. And personally, I don't have ADHD, but I know so many people that do. And it's really important to me to understand my loved ones that have ADHD and that struggle with that, and to be able to have compassion and understand like why their brain is the way it is. So I really love ADHD Aha because yeah, it just gives some insight into adults and what they experience and how confusing it can be to live with ADHD and not know you have it and then realize you have it, and then what big changes can come after that. So I think it's probably a really great show for people that do have ADHD because it can be super relatable to hear about other people's experiences that are similar to your own. And then it's also really great just for anyone because we all love people that have ADHD. So I just think it's really good to try to understand our loved ones. So yeah, that's 3 books and 3 podcasts that can get you started. And if any of those sound good, maybe it could be the step in the direction that leads towards your healing. And if you are struggling today, I just want to say that I know how fucking bad it sucks to be going back and forth with an addiction and to want it to go away and to not be quite there yet. But I want to say that in my life personally, I experienced some hopelessness for quite some time. And now that I'm in long-term recovery, I'm at the point where I love myself and I'm excited to see what happens every day of this like beautiful divine life that we have on earth. So there is hope and you definitely can heal. And if I can do it, anyone can. But yeah, if you're struggling today, I see you and I believe in you. And if you're listening all the way till the end of a addiction recovery podcast, I think that you're doing amazing work and you're doing a great job, and don't stop. All right. Well, it's been really nice speaking with y'all today. If you have book or podcast recommendations, or if you just want to reach out to chat, hit me up in the email info@recoverydemystified.com. And I'd be super happy to connect with you. All right, my friends. I love you so much. You're doing great work. I'm so proud of you. May you be happy and free. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Recovery Demystified. If you like what you heard, share it with a friend or rate and review us so we can reach a larger audience. Recovery Demystified is produced and edited by me, Early Brunner. Stevie Petet made our logo. Our beautiful theme music is by Logan Bragg. And our social media manager is Kaylee Bausch. We are entirely supported by your generous donations as a 501c3 nonprofit. You can find a link to donate in the description. May you be happy and free, dear listener.